Glorious is God's perfect peace, overall victorious in its bright increase. Perfect yet it floweth, fuller every day. Perfect yet it groweth, deeper all the way. Hidden in the hollow of his blessed hand. Never foe can follow, never traitor stand. Not a surge of worry, not a shade of care, not a blast of hurry. Touch the Spirit there. Every joy or trial falleth from above, traced upon our dial by the Son of Love. We may trust him fully, all for us to do. They who trust him wholly find him wholly true. What a great song. And thank you for playing that. Good to see the Baileys back. Seems like you've been forever gone. And we've been watching the tithe checks. And I've noticed Trent's check not in there. But anyway, just teasing. We're glad you're back. And others have just, I think the Pardoes went east. You guys know they went east? It's like you've got a trend going, and we're going to go. Mrs. Goddard and I are going to go another couple of weeks. We're going to try and follow the Paul Bailey trend. Paul Bailey's the guy. I don't want to embarrass him, but anyway, if you want to rent a vacation planner, he's the guy. It's like you have wedding planners. They know how to do cool things. That Paul is the one. Only we're all too broke for Paul to make a living on, so you still got to have a job. But anyhow, we're hopefully you've got an outline tonight. Should have been in the middle of your prayer list. And by the way, Brother DeMova, do you know the Mears family? You probably never met them. I think they've got 9 kids. I can't tell. The picture's pretty small. But they have 2 adopted Fijian children. And what a great family. Just the story. He'll be here in October, if everything goes well, at our conference with Shelton Smith. But the story, Corey Mears' story is phenomenal. 1 semester of Bible college, goes to Fiji and stays for the next 23 years. And look, you young people in Bible college, if you've been a semester, why go back? I'm joking. Stay. You're not Corey Mears, but his church is amazing. His church is. He's just really had a boarding school. He started a school and couldn't work it out, so he made it a boarding school, and then from the boarding school it became an international boarding school. And just the story, he's just really something. So now coming back to the States. His kids, much like Brother and Mrs. DeMoville's children, basically they've spent their, in fact, all of them were born in Fiji. None of them have been in the States at all, except for a couple. They were here with us for several months while they were visiting, but other than just a visit or two. I mean, how often do you go through customs with 7 to 9 children? It's just not one thing you want to repeat very often. Anyway, great people. Love the mission field. Let's make a difference in someone's life. Revelation. If you have your outline, I'm going to, you want to use an outline, that's fine if you don't. But tonight, now let me just preface this. We're going to look at Bible verses. We all believe the Bible, right? That's what we're here for. We believe the Word of God. But it's kind of like if this is the whole story, all right? If you look here, here's this giant story of our future, and we've got a verse here, and a verse here, a verse here, and a verse here. And there's a lot in between that you think, it's like every time I make a point, it's going to answer one question, and it'll bring up 4 more. And my advice is to not ask me your questions, because I don't know either. It's just cool stuff. You know, there are times, I remember, with our kids, the fun of getting up for a family vacation, and I don't know why, everybody's different, but when we left the house, we were dressed and ready to go for life. But once in a while, we'd go on a family vacation, get up at 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and let the kids carry them out in pajamas into the car. And I'm sure there were seat belts and car seats somewhere, but anyway, I'm not sure where. But anyway, they thought it was so neat to go out casual like that. And so tonight, we're going to kind of take a casual journey into the future. And we're not going to answer all the questions, but we're going to eat the popcorn and enjoy the drive, okay? So you follow along as we look. Starting in Revelation 21, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I'll stop for just a minute, make a couple of quick observations, and I'll keep doing this. And you might want to mark Revelation. I think the other verses I'm going to turn to are all in your notes, but if you want to turn to them, we will keep coming back to Revelation 21 and 22. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. So not only is there a new heaven, there's a new what? A new earth. So, and it says, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. So this ball of dirt we're on tonight, it is gone. And the poor people who are holding the sign saying, would you like to live forever in paradise on earth, it's going to burn up and be gone, okay? They've just missed their theology only on a couple of 100 points. But but this heaven we see, remember we talked about the heavens where the atmosphere is, and the heavens where space is, and in the heaven philosophically where God dwells, and that's, we're going to blur those terms a little bit tonight. But this heaven that we see, 1 Peter says it's going to pass away with a great noise. It's going to all burn up, and it's going to be gone. And so there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, all right? So each of these things builds on the next. So not only will there be heaven where we live, there will be a new what? Earth, all right? Got a new heaven and a new earth. Verse 2, and I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. Out of where? Heaven. So we've got the New Jerusalem. Now, well, let's look at some terms here. Because, and again, don't let me throw any wrenches in your mental biblical perspective here. But we're just going to look at Bible verses, okay? So in verse 1, there is a new heaven. And in verse 2, John sees the holy city. So that's a name of this city. The holy city, not capitalized per se, but it's a term we'd use, the holy city, and then the second term, New Jerusalem. So when we start thinking about where we're going to live forever, the New Jerusalem is a very appropriate term to use. And I know some of you are very familiar with this, some of you not, but just so we're going through there. And then notice there's the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now look down, if you would, to verse 10, and we'll just throw that in, and we're going to look at 3 or 4 verses. We're going to keep going back and forth. Verse 10, and he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem. So now, if you go back to verse 2, he blurs the holy city in New Jerusalem. Now it's the holy Jerusalem descending out of heaven from God. So picture just real quick, and this is not a big deal, but just so we get in perspective. Where is John in verse 10? He's on a what? On a mountain, okay? And he's looking at what? The New Jerusalem, the holy Jerusalem, the holy city. So he's on a mountain. So there is a city coming down from God as a bride adorned for her husband. And John is not in that city right now. He's on a mountain over here looking at that city coming down. Now, if you remember from a few weeks ago, and I probably should have reviewed tonight, but we'll just go to last week. We talked about the believers being caught away in Revelation chapter 4. The first vision they see is the throne of God, the rainbow, the beast, the crystal sea. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. And the believers gathered around, and they fall down before the throne, cast their crowns there. Remember, between when their trumpet sounds and we're caught away and the casting of crowns, we talked about the judgment where our works are judged. And there's wood, hay, stubble, gold, silver, and precious stones. And that's where we get the rewards that we bring to the throne of God, cast our crowns. Out comes Jesus, the Lamb of God, and we cry, worthy is the Lamb that was slain. And then we went on from there to other things. So that's where we are last week. Well, this week we are jumping way ahead because we're just talking about heaven. It's not a study of the end times or of the tribulation or whatever. So we're studying heaven, this place we're going to live. What are we going to do? What's it going to be like? And tonight it's the heavenly architecture. What is this place like? And what's going to be inside and around and all that stuff? And again, if you've got some deep theological difference with me, don't let me shake your faith, because when we get there, we'll both find out that I'm right. Or that one of us, or that neither of us are right. You know, a lot of this stuff, as long as we're trusting the blood of Christ, look, when we get there, we'll figure it out. Like Curtis Hudson said, when the trumpet sounds, all those people who believe in a pre-tribulational rapture will be caught up into heaven. All those who believe in a post-tribulational rapture will become pre-tribulational. And when we see it, we'll know. So tonight, I'm giving you my perspective, and for whatever it's worth, and this is not anything I'd argue with anybody about, but I like it. I like when we're surrounded by a world of all the craziness. I love looking for a world with no crazy. I love knowing where we're going. The song, I know where I'm going and who I'm going to see. I have a friend named Jesus who's waiting there for me. And everything's all right in my Father's house. It's this house that's got some issues down here. But anyway, aren't you glad you're not the president? Or any of his friends in Washington, who knows. But anyway, so now look down to chapter 21, verse 16. And this is in your notes. I did stick that one in there. Some of these verses I put in, some I didn't for the sake of space. And the city, so we are calling it a city still, this city that came down from heaven. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs, and the length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. So it's not just a city that's square like our city is. It's a three-dimensional city. And I'm going to show you a picture of it in a minute. I got a picture. I found it. You just Google, and it's there. But not for a minute or two. Isaiah 60 is in your notes. Save you from flipping around and losing yourself. Therefore thy gates shall be open continually. They shall not be shut day nor night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, and that their kings may be brought. So we've got a city that we're reading about here that is square. It's a cube. And if you look at Revelation 21:25, and in Revelation 21:25 it says, the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. That's what we just read in Isaiah chapter 60. Isaiah prophetically looking forward to that day and that kingdom. And but if you look at Revelation 21:26, and they shall bring the glory and honor of the what? Of the nations. Everybody see that? Go back to your verse in your outline. Isaiah 60:11, therefore thy gates shall be open continually. They shall not be shut day nor night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, that their kings may be brought. So picture with me, there's a city. John's looking at this city coming down from God as a bride adorned for her husband. And we're going to begin to look at the details of that city. But there is a mountain John is on, and he's observing this stuff that's going on. And we read that the gates of the city, we'll read about the gates in a minute, the gates are not going to be closed because it's always day, because Jesus is the glory of the city. There's no moon, there's no sun. Christ is the light that lights everything. And this huge city, a brilliant lit place. And so, but if there's a mountain out here John's standing on, probably that mountain is on something. You okay with that? Typically mountains are on the ground. Sometimes mountains could float because God's God. But we already read earlier in verse 1 and 2, there's a new heaven and a new what? Earth. So we've got this city coming down from God called the New Jerusalem, and we've got a new earth God has made. So out there are, according to Isaiah 60:11 and according to Revelation 21 verses 25 and 26, there are nations out here. Let's see that one more time for me, make sure I'm thinking right. And in Isaiah 60:11, men shall bring the forces of the Gentiles, or the whatever term we want to say. I won't fuss about what that means, but the strength of the Gentiles, or their glory, and that their kings may be brought. So out there are kings. Typically kings have subjects. Typically kings have cities. Revelation 21:25, the gates are not going to be shut day or night. Verse 26, and they shall bring the glory and honor of the what? Nations. Over there is the city. Over there are the nations. So over here's the city, the New Jerusalem, the holy city coming down from God, gates open 24/7, just like AM, PM, all the time, all right? Over here, there are kings, there are nations, there is glory, there is cool stuff, you know, like AM, PM, too much good stuff. But now, there's no need for a gate because they're never closed. But just like if you go through a housing area and you look at houses, they'll have shutters that are not shutters. You know, some people use shutters, they actually close them, like Hawaii tonight is wishing they had shutters. I don't know if you read it, I don't know, I just heard a quick thing on the news, but they're supposed to get 18 inches of rain in an hour or two or whatever, and it's wet there all the time anyway. So why don't they bring that to, no, we don't want their 100-mile-an-hour winds. But in our neighborhood, some of the houses have wrought iron on the walls. It doesn't do anything. It's not a gate. It's not a door. It's just stuck there. And then there's false shutters on some of the walls. And all it is to ornament things. Now, when God does stuff, he does it so good. When God so loved the world, he loved everybody. When God made the heavens, he made heavens that can't end. You know, every time a scientist thinks they have a grip on something, then they realize, oh, no, it's like 100 times further than that. What God does is huge. When God saves you, he saves you, the term is, to the uttermost. And when God builds a city, it is going to be so awesome. Back in the book of Hebrews, when it says these all died in faith, not receiving the promise, because they looked for a city that had foundations. And this stupid world we're in has got no foundation. It's a world built on lies, a world built on deceit. It's a world built on every kind of wrong imaginable. But this city coming down from heaven, this city God built, that puppy's solid. It will be there forever. What a beautiful place. Of course, we know there's, if you look at Revelation, the gates, if you look down to verse 21, Revelation 21:21, it says in the 12 gates were 12 pearls. There's 3 gates on each side of the city, 4 sides of the city, 3 gates going in, and there's 12 gates, and they're 12 pearls. You know the song, "He, the pearly gates will open so that I might enter," and that's Bible. A lot of these, you know, it's something, one of the things I love about this book, it's filled with Bible. A lot of the new music, it's just nonsense. It's filled with warm and fuzzy feelings based on nonsense. But man, this thing, there is so much Bible in this hymnal. It's awesome. Everybody have a Bible around when you're doing your devotion. I mean, a hymnal around when you're doing your devotion, the Bible too. But verse 21, the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of 1 pearl. 1 pearl. Now, pearls come from oysters. Let me just ask the Baileys, did you eat any oysters? Clams. Probably more clams than oysters. I don't know. Chloe, you like oysters and clam things? Oh, those are nasty things. If you bread them and deep fry them, I'll suck the breading off and spit the oyster out, but I won't even do that. That's terrible. It tastes like chewing on an inner tube that's been in the ocean for a decade. But giant. So we're looking at a city that came down from God. There's gates that are open. These gates are 1 pearl per gate. Now understand, you know, in your mind, and I've thought this, perhaps you got a gate, a wall that's, some people say 120, some say 200 feet tall. It's a big old wall. And we'll get to the walls in a minute. But got this big wall. Well, the gates don't have to be as tall as the top of the wall. If you remember the lessons when Mrs. Goddard and I came back from Israel, their walls were anywhere from 50 to 100 feet tall, and there's gates. It's an arch gate. Some of them big enough for a tour bus to go through. Some of them just for a car. And if you remember the story, there'll be a gate here, a big gate. A lot of people could foot traffic and driving traffic, sidewalks on both sides. They're all cobblestone, ancient streets, but they're used with vehicles and all. But when those gates are closed, which I don't know if they are anymore, next to them, there's little gates, the size of maybe this door here, or the size of the double doors in the back. Those are the doors that were used after hours. Because when you weren't sure who was coming in the dark, you closed the big gates, and an army might get through that door or that gate one at a time, but you just stay on the inside and you keep conking them on the head, and it's not a problem. So those little gates, and if you remember the story, for those of you who haven't heard it, when Jesus said, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. We went to one of the gates, I can't tell you where, they're all named. The Jewish people name, they put a pile of rocks up and name it. You know, who does that stuff? But Jewish people are very emotional. Oh, it's a beautiful pile of rocks. Let's name that. But there was a big gate, next to it a small one, maybe smaller than that door, and it said right there, the eye of the needle. And it's a colloquialism. We think a needle, you know, like a needle and thread, and a little hole that you're trying to thread through the eye of the needle. No, what it's talking about is you're coming in with your camel loaded with all this stuff, and you get to the door and you think, man, this is going to be a big pain in the neck. Got to unload the camel, get him on his knees, crawl through, drag the stuff through, put it back in the camel. It's easier for a camel to get through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. Not that it's impossible, it's just not as common. It's a lot of work, and that's just your little colloquialism for the hour. So we've got these gates, and so he says that these gates are giant pearls, and they're pretty incredible things. Now let's look at the size of Jerusalem just for a minute. So if you want to hit those screens down, and we'll put a slide up, but don't put it up yet, okay? The New Jerusalem, look at chapter 21, verse 16. It says, chapter 21, verse 16, the city lieth foursquare, the length is as large as the breadth, and he measured the city with a reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are the same. Basically, we're talking about 1,500 miles, and people differ a little bit here and there, but a 1,500 mile wide, long, and high city. Just a thought, if it were to be an apartment building, a building like we have, and if you were to have each floor be 12 feet, which is a big floor, but in a big building, you'd have a 12-foot ceiling, it would be 600,000 stories tall. What an elevator, huh? It's a big, big place. So I found a picture of someone who actually did it graphically for us. Maybe flip these lights off and put it up there if it'll work. Maybe. Not like it did the other day that took 15 minutes to do it. It's just one picture. We can forget about it. Da, 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 da. Did you see it? All right, I'll go back to my notes. There it is. So this is as good as somebody could do with a real globe and the size of the New Jerusalem. If it were to come, if it was a perfect cube and it came down, and you notice the bottom right-hand corners on Florida, bottom left-hand corners somewhere in the west boundary of Mexico, that's how big this New Jerusalem is in ratio to the globe. We're talking about a big, big city. Now, who knows? You know, Matt was saying maybe it's a gravitationally void city, and you walk up walls and houses come out this way and houses come down this way. I'd never thought of that. Believe that to Matt's creative mind to think of that. It could be one street on top of another street, you know, maybe each one's 100 feet high or whatever. But he says in John 14, in my Father's house are many mansions, right? He didn't say many apartments. He didn't say many condos. Mansions. A mansion is not a duplex. A mansion. And so in my Father's house are many mansions, and I go to prepare a place for you. And if you're saved, he's made a place in that city that's that big. Now, you may be on the 1,523 mile, you know, I don't know if it's better. Maybe it's more exclusive property up high. I don't know how that would go. You got a better view. Anybody know how high atmosphere? I know this would be above the atmosphere, right? When does oxygen and stuff like that stop? I should have looked that up. None of you know. Brother Bill, you know everything. You don't know? You didn't know that. Okay, all right. You're going to have to Google it. Now, you're all going to Google it. Stop it. It doesn't matter. I just know 1,500 miles is up in space. We'll leave it at that. All right, get rid of that. Turn the lights on. Everybody's distracted now. So we've got this big old city that came down from God out of heaven. And again, that's just somebody tried to make it as close as they could. But this is the bottom of it. 1,500 square miles would be the bottom of it. You could drop, as big as India is, you could drop India into the bottom and it would rattle around. That's how big this New Jerusalem is. Let's look at the walls for just a minute. I'm sorry, look, I missed our scripture here. I'm blanking here. In the top right hand in your outline, Isaiah 60 verse 17, for brass I will bring gold, for iron I will bring silver. He's comparing it, what would have been built out of brass, what I do is so good, we're going to make it out of gold. What would have been made out of iron, I'll make out of silver. What would have been made out of wood, I'll make of brass. He's just explaining everything in this city is going to be good beyond words. And I'll make thy officers peace. There's going to be people in charge. How about that? You ever think about who's in charge of heaven? Well, Jesus. Yeah, well, Jesus uses people. But they're all going to be peaceful. And thine exactors righteousness. Those are the kind of people and the kind of leadership that's going to be. Verse 18, violence shall no more be heard in thy land, wasting, nor destruction within thy borders. But thou shalt call thy walls salvation and thy gates praise. Didn't I say they name everything? They got all kinds of names. Walls, salvation walls, right there. But let's talk about outside the walls. Again, we're We're just talking about this city, about this place. And let's talk about outside the walls. You ever think about it? We've got a city that came down from God out of heaven, and nowhere that we know of, that I know of, does that city ever land on the ground. So I keep it floating. That's just me. I've got it as a heavenly city. But we already had John on a mountain watching the city come down. We already had nations. We already had kings. We already had the glory of the nations over here. And so it looks to me like something's outside that city. All right, so let's look at this. And again, if I'm blowing your spiritually heavenly gasket, just forget it and don't worry about it, because when we get there, we'll all catch it all. But let's look outside the walls for it. Look at Revelation 21 and verse 17. And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is of the angel. Now this angel's showing him around. Now cubit in the Bible is basically elbow to fingertip or something close to that. And so if you're real small, you'd rather have the person measuring your yarn when you buy it use a long person's arm. You don't have a tape measure. But so we got an angel. And the angel is showing him how big and I think, man, how many times do you have to put his elbow there? But anyway, that's what he's talking about. Just if you want to know what he's talking about the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. Verse 18, and the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And so we've got this incredible, I had to go back, I missed those verses, this incredible, beautiful city, gold as pure as glass, and of jasper, just an unbelievable place, and nothing like it. Well, now, chapter 21, and let's go over to verse 11, and just one more verse I missed, chapter 21, verse 11. And it says, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. The walls and the city were beyond words. Now, outside the walls, chapter 21, verse 24. Chapter 21, verse 24. What's outside the city? And the verse 24. And the nations, so there are nations, right? We read about nations, all right? So verse 24, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it being the city. Jesus is the light of the city. So that city that's up there is going to be so brilliant and so bright that the light of that city will be everywhere. And he says that the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth shall bring their glory and honor into it. So there's kings out here who are going to bring their glory and honor into that city. I don't know if there'll be an escalator, space shuttles going back and forth. I don't know. Or maybe it's low enough you jump. I have no idea. But some of this it doesn't say. But understand this. Let's go back to verse 24. The nations of them which are, what's the next word? Saved. Now people get saved. And I heard somebody say, nations can't get saved. This cannot be a literal verse. Well, you know what? I just happen to think, unless it says it's as or like, I'm going to say it's a literal verse. I'm going to always stand with the Word of God. And let me give you some encouragement and some direction. The people who wrote the Constitution know more about it than the people today who write about it. And the one who wrote this Bible is right, and the ones who write about it may not be right. So you always want to trust the original author, just a simple principle there. So if he says there are some nations who are saved, there are some nations that are saved. It doesn't necessarily mean born again like you're born again, like I'm born again. We'll look at it in a minute. But in your notes there, Haggai chapter 2, verse 7, and I put this into your notes, I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations, twice the word nations, shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. And again, when the prophets, the Old Testament prophets are writing, often they're writing about, in the case of Haggai, you remember Zechariah and Haggai were the preachers who helped get the ball rolling and finish the completion of the temple and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. But many times in the prophets, there's a passage here and there that's pulled out prophetically from way down the time when Jesus was on the cross, like Psalm 22 I read this morning, or down to the second coming, or to the kingdom age, whatever it might be. And so out of the book of Haggai, we see that he will shake the nations, and the desire of all nations shall come. So the things of these nations that are desired are going to come into to that city and fill his house with glory. Now, look over to the book of Matthew. Hold Revelation. We'll be right back. Look at Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25. And when I teach something like this at camp, the teenagers just think it's really cool. When I do with adults, they think, I don't know, this is weird. That's why I've never taught you adults about what stars are or where they came from or what they're going to be in the future. But I have the teenagers, because they just listen and think the Bible's awesome. Matthew 25, look at verse 32. Now maybe let's go back to verse 31. If you're not there, I'll just read it for you. We'll be right back to Revelation, and you have the reference in your notes. Revelation 25:31, and the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him. Then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. So it is a time when Christ is coming back. Now, when we start talking about end times, and we're not studying the end times, but there's several times Jesus shows up for various things. So don't get in a panic over which one. But the bottom line is, he is coming back in verse 31 to sit on a throne of glory, verse 32. And before him shall be gathered all what? Nations. So there's going to be these nations gathered together, and just like we read about in the book of Habakkuk or Haggai, and just like we read about in the book of Revelation, there's nations involved here. And so he'll gather the nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from his goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. And then that's why when you say to somebody, you're an old goat, and you never say you're an old sheep. Goats are bad, sheep are good. I don't know why, but that's whatever. Verse 34, then shall, although goats are a lot more fun than sheep. Sheep are stupid. Goats are a lot of fun. But verse 34, then shall the king say to them on his right hand, come ye blessed of my Father. Grammatically, verse 34, then shall the king say unto them. What's the them? What does it go back to? Nations. Okay? Then shall the king say to them on his right hand, come ye blessed of my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So here's Jesus. He's at a throne. The nations are brought before him. This is before the New Jerusalem. This is before all the stuff we've been reading. This is background. How did those nations get out there? And so the nations come, and he says, you nations go over here, and you nations go over here. Isn't it interesting? The right and the left again. Isn't it funny how often that's that way? But anyway, politically and all that stuff. But anyhow, and you guys, you're out of here. And the nation to the right, he says, come into the kingdom prepared for you. So it tells us that there are nations that he's going to let have this kingdom. There are other nations he's not. You might say, well, what decides what? Well, I'll read you the next verse if you don't have it in front of you. He says in verse 35, for I was a hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, you came unto me. Then shall the righteous what? The righteous nations. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee a hungered and fed thee, or thirsty gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? When saw we thee sick or in prison and came to thee? And the king shall answer and say to them, verily I say unto you, as much as you've done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Now that little phrase, the least of these, my brethren, that can go two directions, doesn't matter at all to what we're talking about here. Brethren could be the Jews. I am pro-Israel, I am pro-Jew. Anybody who's not, has got rocks in their head. But all the way back from Genesis 12, all the way up, you want to make sure you elect pro-Jewish people. And there's a whole lot of Bible reasons. But it could be the Jewish people, though the least of these, my brethren. And we could say the nations that are good to the Jewish people. It could be that from throughout time. It could be during the tribulation, whatever it might be, the nations that treat the Jewish people well. It could be, secondly, God's people, the Christians, or those who got saved during the tribulation time. I have no problem with however anybody wants to put it, but those people that Jesus would call his brethren. And when a nation as a whole, or however he wants to divide it up, it's like how did the seeding in the tournament? How do you do that, right? But when you are good to his brethren, you're in. Now, it doesn't mean saved, going to heaven, lost, going to hell. It's who gets into this kingdom. And you say, I'm not sure I understand all that. Neither do I. Isn't that great? All right. So these nations are going to be gathered, and basically it's how their treatment. I lean toward how they treated the Jews. So we're just going to leave it there. The point is this. Here's the point. There's a city. The walls are jasper, clear as crystal and pure as gold. The city itself is of pure gold. The streets are paved with pure gold. There's gates that are made, each gate of one pearl. And there's a big old angel. I think we missed the angel verse somewhere. Read through chapter 21. There's an angel at each gate. And outside the gate, there are nations and kings and people. And they're going to bring the best they have into that city. This is where you live. And you might say, who lives there? Come back in a couple weeks. We'll get to it, maybe. But that's where you live. We're studying heaven in this lesson, all right? We're not studying all the details and the weird ideas. But this is heaven. It's where you're going to live. This is a wonderful place. A beautiful place. Beyond description, beautiful. And so look back with me just in way of reminder. Well, it's in your notes if you don't have it there. Luke 19, we taught on this a couple weeks ago. I went through this, but in Luke 19:17, it says, he said unto him, well, thou good servant, because thou hast been faithful in a very little, have thou authority over 10 cities. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, where you get, Jesus was telling a parable, every person got their, what they were stewarding, a pound or something they could use for the Lord. And this guy took his and made 10 more. And he said, great job. You get to rule over 10 cities. He said to this one, you made 2. Good. You get to rule over 2 cities. And so according to our production, how much we get done for God, that is, look, Jesus reigns in the city. That's where we're all living. That's the bride. This is the king and his bride living there. That's where we are. That's the nations out there. And somebody's going to rule over 10 cities. Somebody's going to rule over 2 cities. You say, well, how's that going to work? I don't know. I'm just telling you what it says. And I hope that doesn't bother you. I love the Bible. I don't have to understand it. I just enjoy it. I enjoy reading about it. I enjoy thinking about it. I enjoy trying to picture it. I enjoy thinking of the children of Israel, a couple million people walking through with those walls of water going through the Red Sea. Now, you know somebody touched it. You bet. I mean, right? Sure, somebody touched it. There were probably fish there. I'm going to take that one for later. I mean, you miss the Word of God if you don't think. And too often we read it and put it down, walk away. I read my chapter. What'd you get? I don't know. What book you read? I don't know. That's not a, man, this is an incredible book. It's unbelievable. So here we got the city we're going to live in. It hovers above the earth. Outside the walls there are nations. The nations exist out there because of their treatment of the Jews or of God's people, whoever wants to be. They're going to bring their glory into that city where we live. And somebody from there is going to reign out there. Look, it's going to be, first thing in the morning, Steve Rowe gets up, gets in his Jetson mobile or his motorcycle or wingsuit, whatever, and shoots down out of the 700th floor of the New Jerusalem and goes out to make sure business is being taken care of in his city. You say, well, I don't know if I believe that. Well, what do you believe these verses mean? They believe something. It's got to be something. Unless you want to go back to Luther or Zwingli and make it so spiritualized and crazy that it's something, those people told their people never to read the Bible, especially not Revelation. Because you can't understand Revelation unless you get to know the author, and then he'll explain things to you little by little. So these nations, they're there. The bride lives there. The rest of the folks live down there. Look at chapter 20. Let's just quickly, let's go down to the holy city. Look back at chapter 21, verse 2. I got to hurry just for the sake of time. Revelation 21:2. And I, John, saw the holy city. I'm just going to stop for a minute. The holy city. A holy city. Isn't it great we're going to live somewhere where it's holy? No more vulgar. No more slanderous talk. No CNN. No vulgar, no violent, no godless activity, no wicked entertainment, no drugs, no liquor, no violence. A holy city. That's where we get to live. And if you're saved, that's your home. Because when Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you, he meant you. And we're all so different. We're just different as night and day. But the fact is, he's prepared a place for you. And I love the fact that those poverty-stricken people in Nigeria are going to see golden streets one day. Love the fact that people in India who've never had a decent meal like you and I enjoy and take so flippantly, they're going to walk through gates of pearl, 200-foot tall walls and angels outside those gates saying, welcome to your new home. And it really dwarfs a lot of the problems we've got on earth. The song, one glimpse of his dear face, all sorrow will erase. So bravely run your race till we see Christ. A holy city. And then look at that next little phrase there in that verse. We're still in chapter 21, verse 2. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride. Now, I'm not going to make fun of brides. I'm not doing that. But let me talk about brides for a minute. Now, don't take offense, but you know how many brides here, you guys, I don't know if you should pay attention or not, but you love this girl and you decide you're going to marry her and you ask her to marry you. And then you know what, she needs to lose weight. Why? Because she's getting married. He loves you the way you are. But she's got to get her hair this way and her nails and her toes, and you know, she's got to soak in Epsom salts for 3 years or whatever they did back in the days of Esther and Ahasuerus, and you know, soak them in perfume so they smell good. Then he only saw her once a month. Who cares, man? But you know, brides today, they'll take this whole building and turn it into a beauty parlor for a 15-minute wedding ceremony. But a bride cares, right? A bride does care. She's going to put a $10,000 dress on, not at our church. You're going to put a $100 dress on our church, but she's got this beautiful gown that she'll never wear again. Look, rent a dress. Come on, wear it, rent it, pay the $100, turn it in, let someone else wear it next week. It doesn't matter. That's like a used wedding ring. I don't know if the diamond's big enough, whatever. But as a bride adorned for her husband, and you know, ladies, you want to walk down that aisle as wow as you can be. Now think when God adorns. When God adorns something. And what God does is going to be so beyond words good. Man, it's an incredible thing. You just think going through this thing, it will be perfect, more than we can even possibly imagine. I'm going to skip one. This free place in your notes, if you want to, I'm not going to teach on this. I'm just going to mention it. Galatians is lengthy for me to explain it, but Agar is Mount Sinai, where the earthly 10 commandments were given. Our Jerusalem, but Jerusalem which is above is free, which is mother of us all. This new Jerusalem will be a place free of all the especially thinking of the Old Testament Jews who are so bound by things they had to do this and do that. It's a free place. It's going to be a beautiful place, a free place. And you can read some of that if you want to, and I won't go into that. But I want you to look down at chapter 22, verse 1, because these two things we want to close with. And I don't have time to get into it being a free city. But look at chapter 22, verse 1. He showed me a pure river of water of life. Clear as what? Crystal. Remember in chapter 4, the first vision, when John, representing the believers, gets to heaven, he sees the throne of God, and in front of the throne there was what? Sea of crystal, sea of glass, we might say. He showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And so he's giving us another part of that vision that John didn't see when he first came into there in Revelation chapter 4, when he first saw the rainbow and the beasts and the elders and all that thing. And so John now, he's inside the city, and he sees in the city the throne of God, and out of that throne is this river running, clear as crystal. If you've ever been to an ocean in Oceanside and then been to the Bahamas or Hawaii or Fiji or somewhere where you can actually see, or even Lake Tahoe, You know, look over the edge of a boat in Lake Tahoe and you think, oh, it's only about 10 feet deep. No, it's like 80 feet deep and you'll die down there if you can't swim. But clear, I mean beautiful, clear water where you can see things. And so this water coming out of the throne, this pure river is clear as crystal. And I believe that that's coming out just where we read in Revelation 4 and verse 2. And in the midst of the street of it and on either side of the river, there was a tree of life. So here's the throne of God. And there's a river coming out, clear as crystal. There's a street, one side, both sides, whatever. There's a tree there, and the tree is on either side because it's a big old giant tree hanging over or whatever. Doesn't matter to me, this big old tree. And but look there at verse 2. In the midst of the street, on either side of it was a tree which bare 12 manner of fruit and yielded their fruit every month. So 1 month it's bananas, the next month it's kumquats, the next month it's mangoes or whatever. And there's fruit tree. But look at this last phrase. Look there at the end of verse 2. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the what? Nation. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what that means, but Steve Rowe gets up in the morning, and he's got some problem he's got to deal with down there, and he grabs some leaves off the tree on the way by in his motor scooter or jet, whatever he's flying. And I say, what do leaves have to do with healing? I don't know. I'm just reading it and telling you it's going to happen. Something here's what I know. Something inside that city is taken outside that city to the nations that are out here and heals them. You're not going to be sitting on a cloud playing a harp, having a halo and a white sheet. That'd be really boring. Especially about 10 million years from now. Hey, can we get a new hymnal? I know all these songs. We're going to be doing something. We're going to be doing something. And again, like I said, this is a huge picture of where we're going, and all I can do is point out bits and pieces here and there. And I'm sorry, I wish I could do more, but if you want to hold your place, don't lose it. Look over to Isaiah chapter 9. I'll really throw a wrench into your theology for a minute. Isaiah chapter 9. We're going to come right back to Revelation 21. And many of you memorize it. It's a great verse to use in witnessing to people about the deity of Christ, about who Jesus is. Isaiah chapter 9. And this is not in your notes, so you have to scribble a reference down. Look at Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6. It's a great verse when prophetically talking to the Jews or talking to Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, just about who Jesus is. Verse 6, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Now the child was born, the son wasn't born. The son was always the son. God the Son was eternal. That's why the son was given. The government shall be upon his shoulders. He's going to rule from this New Jerusalem. We will reign and rule under him as kings and priests. The government shall be upon his shoulder. His name, speaking of Jesus, his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Now verse 7, let's just read it and take it for what it says. Of the increase, of the what? Increase of his what? Government and peace. There shall be no end upon the throne of David. Now, so he's got a throne, a kingdom, and the increase, you know what the word increase means? It means more than yesterday. Of the increase of his what? Government. Of what he's ruling. Of the increase of his government and of what else? Peace. There shall be no end. It'll be a place where there's more governing and more to govern. It's a place of busyness. There's a lot more to that, and I won't even go there. But back to Revelation 21, and we'll close. This beautiful city that we live in, that we rule and reign from, this cities and nations that we manage for God, that we oversee, them bringing the glory into the city that we live in. This whole thing, it's pretty incredible. But Revelation 21:3, the best part of heaven. Revelation 21:3, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. And you can read through chapter 21. It talks about a lot about heaven that we didn't read, but in verse 3, the tabernacle of God is with men. He sees, in verse 1, he sees this city coming down from God out of
heaven. And John's looking at it, and he hears this voice crying out, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men." There's just this wonder, this joyous outcry. The last time this happened was in the Garden of Eden, 6,000, 7,000 years ago. The last time God walked with men and talked with men, they were in the Garden of Eden. And sin broke that fellowship, and for all these years, God has been fixing and straightening up and brought a Savior, and He's developing us into Christ-likeness. And when that city comes down and we get to move into the city for the first time since the Garden of Eden, you and I are going to be able to walk with God. I mean, we're to walk with Him today, but you're stuck in this old flesh, and you're stuck in this old world. But we get into that world, no more sinfulness, no more wrong, and we're going to know God, and He'll know us, and we'll be, it says, they shall be His people, and God Himself shall be with them and be their God. That word tabernacle, remember, it's the word, it's like to dwell together. It's a habitation. God is going to live with us. You know, how'd you like to have somebody knock on your door? Remember, Jesus went to Zacchaeus. He's up in the tree, and he said, "Hey, I want to go to your house and eat." Zacchaeus fell out of the tree. What? That's what God's doing here. He said, "Hey, come on, live with me. Let's move in together. And I want to know you." And that will take care of most of the problems you can think of today. All right, Father, bless us, help us. May we remember that this world is not our home. We're here to serve you. We're here to help others. We're here to represent Christ. But there's nothing going to be quite like that city. Nothing as wonderful as what we'll see that day. And we don't understand most of what we looked at tonight. I don't understand. Just little bits and pieces. Somehow this thing all fits together. And I'm grateful that I've got a God who's got all the pieces in place. And if you were to come for us tonight, we would be so happy. But if you wait a year or a decade, may we be found faithful. May this church be faithful. May we love and serve and give of ourselves. And may we make a difference. So there's some boy or girl that's going to ride a bus Sunday. Them getting to live in that city will be decided when they trust Christ this week. Somebody in a jail, an arrest home, somebody who's maybe a homeless person in our community this week could have their name written in that New Jerusalem as their future home. Help us to be faithful to do your work, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, God bless you. Have a great night.